Hi, everyone. Missy, Alex, please join me. Um, I am Sarah Meister. I'm Aperture's executive director, and I am absolutely thrilled to be moderating a conversation between two esteemed photographers who are very dear, each dear to Aperture in many different ways. Missy O'Shaughnessy, whose first book, Perfect Strangers, Aperture just reprinted. So back due to popular demand. We were hearing it from all corners of the globe. Um, and Alex Webb, who has published more than 15 books, several very important ones with Aperture, including most recently Dislocations, but also Brooklyn with Rebecca Norris Webb, his very talented wife, and an Aperture Workshop series title, and others. So, for those of you who don't know, Aperture is a 73-year-old nonprofit publisher. And as we say, we have been dedicated to creating insight, community, and understanding through photography since 1952. So, a huge piece of this is what we look at and how we talk about it. And we're really glad you all are here for this conversation today. Now, I'm a little bit new to the Aperture Conversations forum, or at least moderating, but we do have a wonderful chat. And we ask each of you if you want to tell us, there are so many wonderful people here. So if you want to say where you're chiming in from, please do. We will also be answering questions throughout the talk. So feel free to put any questions into the chat, and I will do my best not to disrupt the conversation, but to work those into it. So that is really that's the intro. Let's dive in. Um, Missy, you have photographed on the streets of New York for a very long time, and this book captures pictures, I think 2014 to 2019, about so around 5 years of that work. Um, I love thinking about you as a stealthy ninja on the streets with your camera, and it's a genre that was crowded when you entered it. So maybe you tell us a little bit about how you started photographing on the streets of New York and about this project. Oh, but hold on. I do just want to say, in case you can't see this, Missy and Alex, there are people here from India, Minnesota, San Francisco, New Jersey, Portugal, Brazil, Oregon, New Jersey, Maryland, Bay Area, Connecticut, Toronto, Montreal, Pittsburgh. Anyway, all over the world. So thank you all for joining in. Sorry, I just had to. It is you. Well, we'll start with photographs in New York and then we'll expand it out in the world. But it's clear this is a good genre to be discussing. So, um, Missy, would you tell us a little bit about your process and about this project? Can we start with
Well,
that?
the seed was planted by Joel Meyerowitz. Many years ago, I took a workshop with him, and his contention that street photography is something that photography and the camera can uniquely do. That it kind of lives at the very heart of what is unique about photography. That split second, that fleeting moment, and he really planted this seed of desire in me to get out on the street and see what I could make of it with my camera. And at the beginning, I was very, very shy. I am basically a shy, introverted person. But little by little and day by day, my confidence grew. And when I first started to realize that how generous New York was, that it was at my doorstep. When my confidence grew and I started to make those first pictures that really I felt captured the energy and the people, I was hooked. And that was kind of the beginning. It was really about 2014, I think, that the first picture that I took started to resonate with me myself. Like, that's a that I think that's a good picture. So it took a while, and it's a very New York is a generous city, but the street photography is a very difficult thing to do. It's chaotic. You don't have much time. You want to say something about the city, its people, who you are as an artist, as a photographer. And these things really only come with shoe leather, with time out on the street and practice, practice, practice. And Alex, you've said many a time it's 99.9% failure, and that's absolutely true. If you get a dozen good pictures a year, that's a really, really good year. So it's challenging, but it's very energizing. And for me, it became um, a way to it was really helpful for me as an introvert to practice in this way, to be out in the world, to open myself up to chance and chaos and people. I think you become um, very attracted to people and their differences and their quirks and the light and the energy. So all these things start to fuel the process, to bring you out of kind of a basic shyness, to be after a photograph that's a great moment, but also a great picture. And these are all the things that you're trying to process in a 500th of a second.
More or less.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's, yeah, beautifully described. And I do think it takes a little bravery, a little chutzpah, a little, you're out there mixing it up. But Alex, maybe you would speak from your perspective, how you started photographing on the street and what it's like. What's your process like?
Well, much of it is very similar to Missy's. I mean, it does involve a tremendous amount of walking and waiting. What I think is particularly interesting about so-called street photography, and of course, street
Yeah, we can get
photography
into that.
is a vague term and it means something different to almost everyone, but I won't go there now.
We can
Um,
go there, but
no, 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 no. So, I think the thing about street photography, at least my sense of it, is that it's a process of going out into the world also without preconceptions. You aren't going out there with an agenda. You're going out there largely out of a sense of curiosity. You're not like the photojournalist who's going to cover this, or the sort of more conceptual documentary photographer who's doing something about this subject. You're going out and exploring and finding, and you don't know what you're going to find. And that's very exciting. And as Missy said, very difficult to do and sometimes scary too. There are many days you go out there and you don't get anything. And for me, I go out there and, really, I almost smell the possibility of a picture. Sometimes you walk right into a picture, it's all happening. But other times there's a little something going on the street. Maybe it could just be a shaft of light or a patch of color or something that one person is doing somewhere. And you sense there's the possibility of a picture there. You hang out a little bit. Most of the time, it doesn't work. But every once in a while, something happens. And usually, what's really special about when it happens is that it's something utterly unexpected, that you think somehow, oh, someone's going to come into the frame here and that's going to make the picture. But actually, it's something else totally different that makes the picture. And so I have this really deep belief in this sort of sense of mystery of the process because it's so reliant on luck, serendipity. I mean, I think it's kind of a wonderful concept. You go out the door, and one day you take a right turn. And you get to the corner and you take a left turn. And then you take a right turn, and maybe you find a picture. Why did you take that right turn the very first time and not take a left turn? If you'd taken a left turn and then a right turn and left turn, you would have found a totally different picture. So there's something about this sort of process of serendipity that's really remarkable, scary, and very exciting.
I mean, I just think it's amazing when you think, for you, Alex, maybe for a few more years than Missy, but Missy, you were saying the shoe leather, just what, and this relates to a question that one of our guests named Ruben asked, what are the things that help keep you growing, that keep you at it, given the failure rate, given how scary it is, given how much serendipity is involved, like what is it that makes you keep looking for something new?
the incredible variety and bounty of the world. I mean, because, I find a new project. I mean, it takes a while, but when I find a new project, all of a sudden I feel like I'm, you know, entering something else, and in different times in my life, different kinds of things have been incredibly important to me. You know, Early on, one of the most important places to work was Haiti. And it was, I discovered working in Haiti early on when I was, I don't know, 22 or 23, and it was incredibly compelling and exciting. And it was at a time when I didn't want to work in the United States. And for 35 years, I worked largely outside of the United States. More recently, I've come back and I'm trying to deal with my own country again. And so there are these, sort of deep, complicated, often inexplicable urges that make me choose one thing over another at a different point in my life.
And
Yeah.
I, and I
Yeah,
think
go ahead.
I think too, the ever-changing nature, I'm the huge bulk of my work as New York is because that's where I live. And I have a lot of things that have kept me closer to home in the past few years. But the ever-changing nature of the city is, really a fascinating thing. It feels the world is inexhaustible for a camera. And, the city, this New York is very different post-pandemic than it was beforehand. The rise of the cell phone, the change of composition of kind of the type of people you see on the street still interest me. I kind of wonder why, and it drives me out into the city again and again. In many ways, it's more difficult. In other ways, it's still New York with the same kind of manic energy. And yeah, trying to push yourself. I think I know who asked that question, and it's something he and I have talked about. And it is a challenge to push yourself beyond making the same types of pictures over and over again. And you have to catch yourself at that. You have to say, well, I've taken that picture in various iterations, 1,000 times. Do something new, find something new, go get to a different place at a different time of day and see what the energy is transmitting to you.
Mhm.
It's very instinctual, working on the street and working with the unplanned. To build a project out of just very things that you react to in the real world is really a challenge.
Yeah. Go
I,
ahead, Alex.
I think that's really interesting what Macy said also about the changing of the streets of New York and so forth, because I think a lot of times people don't necessarily talk about street photography in that sense, in terms of how it is a particular kind of extremely personal, subjective interpretation of a given time or a given place, you know. But clearly, we know things about Paris in the 50s from Cartier-Bresson's photographs, or America in the late 50s from Frank's photographs that we wouldn't possibly know otherwise. And so I think that, Times street photography almost can be kind of a bellwether as to what is happening in that society at that particular time. But it's done through the vision of the individual photographer, which tends to be extremely subjective and personal.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Absolutely. And there is really an important documentary component to it. I mean, I know a lot of street photographers are shaking their fists at the sky with the cell phone, that people are buried in their cell phones and, they're distracted and not paying attention to each other. And so that it's a challenge, but it is inarguably an element of life on the street, and we can't ignore it. But we can try to make an interesting picture that shows, how we're living now, how we behave
Right.
now.
Because if, I don't know, maybe this is an interesting moment to get into really what what we mean by street photography. But street photography doesn't inherently mean somebody looking at one another or looking at the camera. If it is responding to the time we're in, then street photography is everyone barely missing one another because they're absorbed in their phone. And whether that makes a less interesting picture, well, does it? I guess. In other words, why would one shake one's hand at the sky over the cell phone. I don't see it as a threat to what, real artists with cameras are doing on the street. Do you?
Well, I think in the fact that you want to see life on the street without everybody doing the same
Not
thing.
zombies. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It's just another uh, thing that we're contending with in building a picture. And it really has, post-pandemic. I mean, I didn't really feel the struggle that I feel now to make a picture that's full of life, that isn't really full of distracted people.
Yeah. So there's just a question from Allie who asks, when do you put the camera down? In other words, what makes you decide either at the end of the day or when you're getting ready to say, yes, I'm ready to see that as a book. And maybe you each answer to both of those questions, versions of that question. Missy, maybe you go first. You go first, Missy.
Well, for me, it's just usually sheer exhaustion because when I do, when I do take, when it is a day that I'm going to be photographing, I'll start at 9 and end when the sun is gone and walk, usually 12 to 15 miles. So people say, why don't you photograph at night? It's because I'm too tired. And I do like to work with natural light. So quite literally, my own energy levels, which are still high, knock wood, and it energizes me. So I never really think about tired. But on a given day, I put down the camera when I realize my eyes have just glazed over, that I'm no longer
And how many pictures is that in a day like that?
150, maybe 200. I shoot
Okay.
digitally, so
So
maybe.
that's not that many actually for,
No, I've gotten more selective because I'm, as it is, I'm a year behind in going through my photos, and you realize if you're not being selective, you're not furthering anything. But by the same token, you never know when that little element's going to appear in a picture that's going to make it or break it. So if you're being a little too careful about how much you shoot, you might be missing things too. So. And then a body of work is much harder to define. I think in my case, Aperture came calling, and that was, the work was bounded by, the body of work that I had done in the past 6 years. And so I think if you're not given constraints are good things. And
Mhm.
I'm continue to do this work in New York. And would it be another book that's similar or a really different approach? You at a certain point you have to hem it in, or it will never end. So in my case, for this book, it was okay, let's see if you've
Let's
got,
go.
let's go. Here it is. And I think I was bringing in pictures. I think there's a picture that came in at the very last minute that was kind of a brand new picture at the very end. But when the edit was laid to rest, it was over.
Alex, what about for you? When do you put your camera down?
Well, exhaustion is definitely a factor as well. I work a little differently with Missy than Missy does. I tend to work really early and late, with the light. So I will go out, you know, before breakfast, 6, and work till 10:30. Then I'll sort of take the middle of the day off and then head out again around 2 and work into dark. I do work some after dark, but I do face the same kind of exhaustion that she does at that point.
Yeah.
Um, you know, in terms of when a project is done or when you decide, this is a really complicated, intuitive decision. And I think different projects have different arcs of completion. I have projects that basically were a couple years of photographing, my Haiti book, for example. Emotionally, it felt right to bring it to a close at that particular point. On the other hand, my Mexico book, La Calle, it was more than 30 years of work. During that period of time, I did a whole bunch of other books as well, but somehow I wasn't emotionally ready to let go of Mexico. I still wanted the possibility to return to the streets of Mexico. I didn't feel I was quite done. Now, what was I looking for? I don't know. I mean, it wasn't a specific image or anything of sort. It was just this sort of kind of feeling. And so it's a very emotional, intuitive kind of thing for me as to when to bring a project to a close.
Oh, interesting. So there are two different questions, one from Tom and another from Olga, both about editing. And so, and actually, Alex, sorry, I meant to ask the follow-up question is how many of a day of shooting, how many is that like?
I take a lot of pictures. I feel like,
Okay.
particularly these days, working digitally, so you take a few extra pictures. Big deal. I mean,
But then,
I'm not dealing with all those yellow boxes of Kodachrome slides anymore. So no, just buy a bigger hard drive and put it all on it. So I can easily shoot 500 pictures in a day. Absolutely.
so,
And
so
and
here's these two questions. I'll read both of them because I actually like the way each is phrased, and then you can answer to whichever one you are in both. So Tom asked, given a 99% failure rate or worse, can you talk about the editing process? What makes a keeper for you? And then a similar question from Ola. What's your editing process? Do you decide entirely on your own? What's a failure, in quotes, or a good picture? Do you seek outside feedback? What does this editing process, this winnowing down, look like for each of you? Alex, you want to go first this time?
okay, sure, sure. Okay, so let's say I go off somewhere for a couple weeks and photograph and so forth. I come back. Um, I usually, working digitally, I download every night. I look at the work, but I don't edit. I don't select while I'm on location generally. I mean, maybe occasionally, but generally not. I like to mimic the feeling that I used to have with film, which is the sort of returning to the work and discovering it all over again. Um, when I get back, I make a rough edit. I sort of tag anything that looks interesting at all. And that goes onto a hard drive and I copy it onto two hard drives. And then I make subsequent edits smaller and smaller and smaller. Once I reach something that I really feel pretty good about, I show it to Rebecca at that point. I mean, and we do the same. She does the same thing with me, and of course we do the same with our joint projects. And I find that incredibly valuable in terms of getting a slightly more objective sense of what it is that I'm doing. And then once we discuss things, and of course in our household, the artist has final say. So even if she doesn't like a picture, I like it, it stays in. Uh, you know, I make prints because I really feel that I can't fully decide about something looking at it on the screen. I have to have something tangible. And I make some smaller prints and some larger prints. And then once I'm really and then I make smaller when I'm working on a project and beginning to build it, I make even smaller prints and start playing with those. And I work with Rebecca after a period of time. I usually start making a selection, building a sequence, building another sequence, seeing how the photographs talk to one another. And they basically talk to one another on multiple levels. There's a relationship between the subject, there's a formal relationship, a color relationship, a mood relationship, and you're working simultaneously on all these different levels in terms of making the relationships. So, at a certain point, then, if it's a project that I'm well into, the project it goes up on these little prints on the walls on these magnetic walls of our studio. And, when Rebecca and I work on a book, it usually takes us about 6 months to come to an agreement about a sequence. You put it up there, live with it for a while, go away from it. You find that if you leave it up on the wall and come back to it, the pictures start to tell you which ones shouldn't be there. And so it's this ongoing process of living with it, editing it, selecting, going back, coming back again, and so forth. And that's basically the way I work. It's a long process. Now, obviously, there are times I do work on assignment and so forth, so I have to select pictures faster. But that's the
No,
essence
we're
of what I do.
we're going to live in an ideal world here. But
Exactly, exactly.
but
Let's live
Alex,
in the ideal world.
one question I have though, hearing you say this, it's as if what you're describing, when you begin something, the editing is toward a book. In other words, it's not just editing toward a body of work.
Generally,
edit, yeah.
yeah. Generally speaking, I these days tend to work in project form. I don't just sort of go out and
But
photograph
project form
randomly.
specifically as imagined in a book, not project form as in this body of work is finite or defined by.
Well, I mean, books have always been really important to me. I mean, I first experienced photographs that I really loved in book form. It was for like 50% of all street photographers, it was the decisive moment in the Americans that turned me on for the first time, you know. And I've always felt that the book form was a very special and unique form that for photography specifically, because, particularly with good reproduction, you know, you really can get something that really looks pretty much like the photograph that you took, you know, and, and that's very different than, you're never going to get the plasticity of a painting or the three-dimensionality of a sculpture. But photography has this unique relationship with the printed page. And then there's also this thing about the creation of a body of work and a sequence and how it works and what kind of narrative you create and how you have crescendos and diminuendos and so forth. And you come away with this body of work that says something or another about something or another that you feel in the world. Rationally, you may not understand exactly what it is that you're really saying, but the pictures say it.
Interesting. So Missy, tell us about how do you, I mean, you're actually, it feels like you're
I have
already
exactly,
editing. Oh, yeah.
I have exactly one book, so I'll speak just to the,
Well, also note to the process though, because even it seems to me like your editing begins, even with your discipline of what you're taking a picture of. Does it feel fresh to you? Does it feel unlike something else that you've done? So, yeah, talk us through the arc.
yeah, I think as far as, editing from a day or a week's worth of work, it's fairly clear. It's fairly clear to me which pictures work and which don't. They're few and far between. So that with Perfect Strangers, my editor Denise Wolf said, bring me everything. And obviously I couldn't do that. That would be, cruel. But we
Well,
started because we started with about 500 pictures that I felt.
but that's 500 pictures. I'm just going to point out how much editing you've done to get it to 500 because, in other words, you think of 6 years of working on the streets of New York, taking 150 at a minimum pictures a day. What is it that helps you recognize what you're looking for, what you like? Because Alex was saying he has Rebecca to kind of be a thought partner in that. How are you refining even that ability to distill it down to 500? Because that's a
Well,
massive, yeah.
you, I'm very, very self-critical. Usually there is a spark, a punctum, a composition, a person that really enlivens a two-dimensional image. So that's usually the starting place. I know pretty quickly what's interesting, what's even worth showing to anybody. So
By the
I'm
way, that's a rare gift. I'll just point out that is, in other words, were you an art history major? Were you like, in other words, that
Actually, I started before I had my first child. I had started a master's degree in art history. So I was a journalism major, but with a real love for art history. So I think, and I'm a big book collector. I think I've just educated myself into what makes dynamic composition, what enlivens a picture, what makes you drawn to pay more than a fleeting bit of attention to a photograph.
Mhm.
And I too, then when we got into the process of sequencing the book, there are all sorts of delights and challenges. I start with pairs, kind of like, uh, not that I want a book to be all pairs because I think that becomes kind of like you're just put there's no break if every book is a pair. There's no break. There's no time to pause or think or slow down a bit. But I start with pairs because then they could be spread out. It's kind of, do these do these two pictures, do these four pictures speak to each other? Is there, in my book, the challenge, it was all Manhattan. So the challenge is you can't have someone sweating next to the snow falling. And how do you take the seasons that I've worked and not make that the subject, but not make the weather or how people are dressed a distraction. So it has to be. So we worked ourselves into a little cooler people in coats, but it's not really obvious. We didn't make it obvious that now we're in the wintertime and now we're in the springtime. So we were always playing with having every picture, relate to what's you've experienced before, but don't shock. There might be a great pair, but in a longer sequence, they would stop you, and you would realize in the process that it just didn't work. So it evolved over many. I think we must have done a half dozen sessions of a couple hours apiece, and we'd have our pairs, and then we'd start to build the ending sequence and the opening sequence, and then when you have a strong opening and closing, then you're working on the meat of the matter and how they're all going to speak to the whole. And it's again tremendously subjective. You kill your darlings. There were pictures that we loved that we just couldn't fit in. I had a picture that every time we put it in, the color in it was a problem. So color presents a whole new, and as Alex well knows, another set of challenges that a picture can be made, just not work because of some aspect of its color or where it falls in a natural sequence just isn't going to work because there might be something that distracts you from a flow. So all those things were taking. At the end, I wanted to throw the pictures in the air and let them fall where they may. But
That's what my sister always told me she thought being a curator was. And I was like, no,
yeah,
because
Danny Ryan once said to me, "Oh, that's the way to just edit a book. Just throw it all up in the air and let it fall."
I mean, but actually, I think the thing is what you're both getting at is different ways of saying, it's funny. I never noticed the season. Like I've looked through your book, Missy, let's say a dozen times. You don't notice it when it's working. You only notice it when it doesn't work, when there's something that sort of catches you and you're hiccuping. And so, that's the purpose of that, in my mind at least. And yes, can't be replicable. Missy, a question for you, one from Mills and a similar one from Patty, that you mentioned your confidence growing that helped your work. And the question is, what helped your confidence to grow? How did you develop that?
doing the work. And I think realizing that through body language and intent, it really, it's like being in physical condition. I really believe that. You start out, you're shy, you're taking the backs of people, you're far away, you're scared, and that stops you from pressing the shutter. And I think it's practice. And then as you do it more and realize that you're not getting in trouble and people aren't looking at you funny, I've become very quick. I'm physically small. I'm, later middle age, and I've learned how to move my body so that people barely notice me. My size and helps. And if people commented, your pictures are intimate, and I'm short, and so I'm coming at people from a little lower angle, and I do think I've started to really embrace that. So it really was just practice. It's just practice, and I find if I haven't been out for a while, I'm a little slow out of the gate, um, and it's really practice. And
Mm.
then realizing that when you start to make the kind of pictures that excite you, the fear drops away because you see something developing, you want it more than anything. So fear at that point, it kind of goes the other way. Now it's just, can I get in the right position? Can I be quick enough? Is the light good? Or is someone going to pass in front of me? Is someone wearing, construction orange, which I hate? And, it's just making it all come together through a lot of practice and a lot of failure. Listen, it's so full of failure. I always think it keeps me very humble, because there are many days you go out and think, I'm no good at this. And so
Uh,
I guess I'm just very determined. I just pick myself up again and go out again. And it comes. It comes with practice and paying attention and looking at a lot of other great work, and patience, knowing that moment will come.
Well, hearing you speak about the orange construction vest brings me to some other questions that people have asked. David and Linda asked also similar questions. David said, "What elements do you look for in a picture that make it a success?" And I think the inverse of that is, what do you avoid because you know it's going to not work out well? And then Linda said, "I'm curious about what each of you consciously includes or excludes from the edges of your photos: utility poles, cut off arms and legs, a dog's tail." She asked. So maybe Alex, will turn to you and just sort of say, are there things that you know you're likely to get a good picture if it's in there, and likely to be a disaster if it's not?
In color photography, white t-shirts are horrendous. It's like you take a picture of the white t-shirt, everyone's eye goes to the white t-shirt. You know, um,
Okay.
I don't have any hard and fast rules or anything about this or anything of the sort, because I find that every situation varies, and there are times when, an orange vest can really work, and other times it's the wrong thing. So, I mean, it's all about sort of a feeling, a sense that, somehow these things all somehow work together. And I can't really explain it. And my feeling also is, if I probably could rationally explain it too much, I might not be able to do it anymore.
Mm-hmm. Missy,
Very,
what about you?
very
Other than
often,
construction vests?
yeah, though that bright green and bright orange just are too hot for me in a good composition. White t-shirts too. Listen, what comes in at the edge of the frame often can make the picture. Uh,
Absolutely.
that's the beauty of the rectangle that we're working with, or the square, depending, that you're working with, is it's really important to have things going on at the edges. I've had
Yeah.
a hand come in or a foot come in that can really help make it a more interesting picture.
Mhm.
So, and as a street photographer, you have to let go of the tidy frame, because it's not going to happen. And usually that makes a very tidy, centered, subject is not an interesting photo. Alex's work is
Although there is that good quote about the frame. Well, what is it? So I was, doing a little homework before today, and I was thinking of Gary Winogrand's street photographs, and so he has some wonderful quotes. And one of them is that he says, in the end, maybe the correct language would be, how does the fact of putting four edges around a collection of information or facts transform it? A photograph is not what was photographed, it's something else. And so it's sort of like that boundary is what makes it. So,
Yeah, well,
um,
a lot of times what's outside the frame entirely, what's left out is what makes the picture inside
mhm,
work. Yeah, absolutely.
interesting.
Well,
So,
Gary apparently hated the term street photography.
yeah, that true. We're using it as a helpful moniker to,
I agree. I
yeah.
agree entirely.
Um,
It's like
but
if I was to say I was walking the streets, all of a sudden it sounds okay, but it's photography, and it's photography of a moment, uh,
yeah,
unplanned, unscripted,
in a
slice
public
of time
sphere,
in the public realm.
Or
And
sometimes semi-public too.
semi-public.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Because well, hold on. Before we there are some other questions about the definition of street photography, but there's so many questions about permission and consent, and I want to get at these. Vasant asked a thoughtful one, although it's representative of a number of questions. Are there times when you get a sense of a conflict between the subject's hesitancy to be photographed and your desire to get that great image? And how do you deal with that? So maybe that's a good entree into questions of permission and consent.
sure. I mean, I certainly, if I sense that people are incredibly uncomfortable with my photographing, I back off. I mean, I'm not out in the world to make people's lives miserable. Uh, you know, so yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I mean, I think one of the things about photographing in the street also is it's very much about the aura that you give off. If you give off an aura of not being threatening, you're not there to make fun of people, that you're comfortable in your skin and comfortable being there, that there's a purpose that's somehow valuable, you being there, very often you'll be able to photograph. If you come off as incredibly nervous, people around you are going to be nervous. Now, that said, obviously, there are plenty of situations in plenty of parts of the world where people don't want to be photographed, and you work with that. And I find that and there's certainly times when people want to talk to you and ask you what you're doing, and I tell them. And sometimes it's okay, and sometimes they don't like it, and I say, okay, I'm sorry, I'll back off. Uh, but I think being easygoing and sometimes you make a joke of something or another, you know, uh, I think that's really important in the process. But photography's it's a tricky medium. I mean, you are entering other people's worlds, other people's spaces. Different cultures also have extremely different attitudes about that and different laws. I mean, technically in
Mhm.
France, you're not supposed to take pictures in the street of people without their permission. In the world of Cartier-Bresson and Douaneau and Brassai and so forth. Whereas in the United States, it's considered okay in public spaces as long as you're not doing something libelous. So but I think it's really important to be sensitive to people and to be aware of how they're
Miss,
feeling.
yeah, Missy, how do you approach that?
Absolutely. I think that, I will argue for what I do, and how I do it because I have my own standards. If someone says, please delete that picture, I will delete it because then I don't love the picture no matter what. Because I'm documenting our world, but hopefully with an extremely sensitive and humanistic point of view. So I don't photograph the homeless. I don't, if people were in some sort of terribly compromising situation, I wouldn't take the picture. I once took a picture of a bagpiper on the ground at the St. Patrick's Day parade. And he was lying there. And he was surrounded by police. And I thought, oh, that's an amazing picture. And I waited. I didn't take the picture for a few minutes. And then he was joking with the cops. He said, yeah, it's my trick knee. And it was I knew he was fine. And I took the picture. And I've shown the picture, but it's like just at the edge of what I would show. But I didn't take the picture until I knew he wasn't in a compromising position.
Mhm.
I think consent, it's tricky because now with everyone with a cell phone and how easily it is to show your work on Instagram and on the internet, the consent has risen as a very large concern.
Mhm.
However, when you think of photography, if you were to remove the work that has been taken without consent, photography would be eviscerated. The history of photography would be bereft of the greatest work that we have for reference and for to look at how the world looked in another time. So I think I think it's important to document the world in the way that we do. I believe in it, and I stand by what I do because I also have a very clear line that I draw about what I will and will not photograph. And
Mhm.
it's, you can't make it always the hardest line that everyone's going to adhere to, but I had a friend who once said when our kids were little, he said, as a parent, it's not so much where you draw the line, but that you draw the line.
Hmm.
And I've carried that with me because I have a line
Mhm.
that I will defend. And I hope that my work is I believe my work is very respectful of people. And so that I don't have consent doesn't wake me up at night.
Yeah,
So
and I think that I think every photographer sort of figures out street photographer figures out the parameters within which they can work and which they feel comfortable work. There are certainly photographers out there who photograph much more aggressively than I do, and I would feel uncomfortable with that. On the other hand, there are plenty of photographers who think that I'm aggressive. So, I mean, I think it's a complicated personal judgment, and I think a lot of it is what do you feel comfortable with? And there are times I have stepped over a line and I feel like, no, I'm going somewhere I don't feel quite comfortable photographing in this situation anymore. And it's really hard to evaluate exactly just why or when it is, but I sense it.
I wonder also, one of the things I'd like to get to is this question of influence. What practitioners working in similar veins does their work resonate with you? Alex, you mentioned the decisive moment in the Americans. Missy, I'd love to hear you speak to, I know Joel Meyerowitz, you mentioned him before, but I guess for each of you, and is the way that they navigate these questions of sort of how you exist on the street in relation to what you're photographing, how much does that factor into how you identify with them as an influence?
Hmm. There's a lot of
Or
questions.
I guess actually
Yeah.
we could spit that out into two. So
Yeah.
mainly I'm actually just curious, who do you like who's done, you're both living in probably the most robust channel through the history of photography, going all the way back to Daguerre. So the idea of taking pictures and there's such a long, rich history. So who do you like the most? And if there is anything about the people you like that you feel resonates with this question of, how they operate on the street, where their line is, I'd be curious. But mostly I'm just curious, who do you like?
Hmm. So many influences. Very early on, Harry Callahan was it just, I was entranced by his work. This is before I worked on the street. And it's funny, thinking about this talk today, I pulled his Harry Callahan's The Street off the shelf. Robert Frank, Joel Meyerowitz, Gary Winogrand have been huge influences for me. But and The Americans has been one of those books, like, at first, when you first look at The Americans, I don't know that everybody really gets it. It's one of those books that brings you back again and again and again as a photographer, as the subject. The sequencing is so brilliant. Not every picture is perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but he's told this story from his perspective as an immigrant, as his travels through the country. And so that book has been a huge influence, I think. I'm certainly one of many who find that just a foundational book for so many reasons. But I'm always looking at new work, and I'm always, the masters of this, the Cartier-Bresson and the Meyerowitz and Winogrand, I'm always turning to, because their pictures are complex. Not, oddly enough, I find, as I'm doing this more and more, Cartier-Bresson, I find them a little simple sometimes, but they were of another time. I like a really complex frame with things to. I want my eye to travel around the frame. So the photographers who really can catch those moments that are a little messy but full of life have always been the people that I return to again and again.
Alex, what about you?
Well, I mean, many of the people that Misty has mentioned, I mean, there's that sort of that stream of, we'll call them street photographers, but, starting with Cartier-Bresson, Kertész, Frank, Friedlander, Winogrand, Klein, interestingly enough, largely black and white photographers, and I'm very specifically a color photographer these days, though I started in black and white. Um, so yeah, so I mean, I basically agree with most of what she says. I also think that, we also don't talk about other kinds of influences, non-photographic influences.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, I mean, I come from a family of artists, and I was dragged to museums early on. You know, I remember loving De Chirico's work, for instance, early on. And
Mm.
if you think of my work from Mexico, those long, deep shadows, there's definitely a relationship to those metaphysical paintings of De Chirico's. Uh, I love Braque's early work, and there's something about the layering, the cubistic layering, that. I was an English major, and many of my projects have been inspired by various writers. I mean, the first time I went to Haiti, it was Graham Greene's The Comedians, a novel set in Haiti that fascinated me, also kind of scared me, made me go to Haiti. Same with the border. Graham Greene's The Lawless Roads. There's a description of the process of crossing a border there that made me intrigued by the notion of a border. So, so there are all these other kinds of influences outside of the photographic world that have, for me, have
Hmm.
been, equally and at times more important than, particularly in the process of putting together a project. Because I often feel that the putting together of the project and the narrative, I sort of, make relationships with, you know, novels, poetry. I mean, often the structure of a book has a kind of rhythm to it that may be poetic or musical. Some books may be melodic, other books may be contrapuntal, depending on the subject matter. So you pay, I mean, so if we're particularly putting together a project, those have always been very important to me.
Interesting. Well, this is a question from Christopher that I'm going to ask as a segue to ask you to talk about what you all are thinking about and working on now, because I think everyone loves to hear um, what you're up to. Christopher asked this: do you find your best pictures coming from when you push yourself into an unfamiliar neighborhood, or when you're walking around your home stomping ground? And of course, the answer to that can be complex. But Missy, maybe you'd start as, where do you find your best pictures and what are you looking at today?
Um, Well, I find my best pictures wherever I am. I've done the majority of my work in Manhattan, so I feel I have the pulse and the rhythm and a knowledge of the where there's going to be energy and light and something going on. I always keep my ears open, never listen to music. So my familiarity with New York is a real advantage. But then I've taken a few trips to Rome in the past couple of years, and I've been working there, a week here and a week there. And, the thrill of being just somewhere completely new and unfamiliar can also drive you to push you well beyond your, I say in New York, I get it on a little bit of a cow path, that I know if I go here at this time of day and then I go here and I like it over here at this time, that I've suddenly kind of worked myself into a cow path. And when you're somewhere new, everything is new. So there's the delight and freshness and the energy that comes from a completely new visual experience that can drive you in new directions. I'm sure Alex is the one who can speak to this much more than I can. So I guess a little bit, both things can drive you as a visual person. I think to build a body of work takes time. What I'm feeling challenged with, if I'm going to build some Rome work, is how am I going to find enough time to be there
Mhm.
to make a strong body of work. And that's just time and energy, is making the time to do it. I want to know from Alex, how long do you need to be in a place, do you feel, to build a body of work, to make work that's starting to say something about a place and its people, that's more than someone just dropping in on a trip.
Um, mm, it varies tremendously. Uh, you know, a lot of my projects involve multiple trips. I mean, I mentioned Mexico. I don't know how many trips to Mexico I made, 30, 40 trips to Mexico over the years. My Haiti book was, I think, 11 trips over 2 years. Rebecca's and my Rochester book was 5 trips in 1 year, but it was a very complicated book, so it took an entire year to figure out how to put it all together.
Mm.
So it varies some. I find I can sometimes produce pictures quite rapidly in a place to my surprise, and other times not. So, um, I'm currently working on a series of photographs of American cities. And I don't spend lots and lots of time in each city. I spend a week, maybe 2 weeks in each city. But, recently I made a trip to Hartford, Connecticut, and I was there for just 3 days, and I pulled a couple pictures out to my tremendous surprise. But it was one of these things where there were like three places in the city, three corners that seemed interesting that I kept returning to again and again. Everywhere else, I couldn't pull anything out of it. But there were these three corners, and sometimes it had to do with light, and sometimes it had to do specifically with what was going on there. It's it's so unpredictable. I mean, I think that's the thing that I really feel. But for a real full project, I think that one needs to spend, if you're going to do a project in a year, you have to spend a lot of time on the street
Mhm.
in a year. I mean, I mentioned Rochester, but it was a collaboration with Rebecca, so it was really, only half a book. Uh, so, uh, yeah, yeah. Um,
Well, that is very interesting to hear the two of you. I'm so excited to see more of your Rome pictures. Missy, Alex, as you know, your American cities, we are eagerly awaiting talking about what that might look like. So I just want to thank you. We had 400, nearly 400 people tuning in live, and they stayed through the whole thing. So I just want to thank everyone who joined us. Thank our wonderful artists who made it such a not miss gathering. So thank you, Alex. Thank you, Missy. All of our Aperture conversations are available on Aperture's YouTube channel, and this one will be joining them soon, so you can share it with your friends and revisit. And Alex and Brianna do some magic, adding in some extra pictures that we were talking about. And if you'd like to buy a copy now that Perfect Strangers is back in print, we're going to offer a discount on that. So you get the discount code is perfect, which is perfect. I'm so glad that's the discount code. And it will work for both Perfect Strangers and Suffering of Light through September 30th. But let's add in the Americans too, because I feel like, Missy, hearing you describe that now that Aperture is publishing the Americans again, I'm sure we can figure that out. So for the Americans, for Suffering of Light, or for Perfect Strangers, use that code PERFECT before September 30th. And wow, that was a lot of time talking about discount codes. Anyway, thank you, Missy and Alex. It was really a joy to see you both. It's been a gift for Aperture to work with you, and we look forward to continuing it into the future. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, all 400
Yes.
people. We're amazed and honored, and it was so much fun to talk with Alex and get some of these ideas coming together. So thank you, everybody. And
We'll obviously have to talk more because there were loads of things we never
Yeah.
got to.
Part two.
Yes, definitely.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.